special needs kids and.
You know what? I don't even think it's general. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, it's 7 p.m., January 16th. And I'd like to call to order the budget hearing for the 2018-2019 budget. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you join me, please. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you. Before we get started, just in case there is public comment, please note with the budget hearings, it's a little bit different. They're at the end of the evening until the last day when we will move it up. So we're going to start off with the proposed superintendent budget presentation.
Excellent.
And I'm moving.
Yeah, did you get the print copy of the presentation?
I did not, I did.
No.
Four. Here's a pile.
Thank you.
Push around.
Thank you.
Get one?
Have a stack.
Get two, one for each handle.
There you go.
Joe's not here.
Oh, he's still sick?
He is.
Oh, my gosh.
I told him to stay home.
Yeah.
The doctor told him to stay in bed.
So, thank you. We'll go through kind of maybe a 10,000-foot view tonight, and then over the next few nights, the board will have the opportunity, the public will have the opportunity to go and kind of dig into each of the sections. The full budget will be online at about 8 o'clock tonight, as soon as this presentation's over, as will each presentation that's given. And then as we progress through the process, all the presentations will be posted on the website as well. I'll apologize a little bit as my back turns to you during tonight's meeting. The budget process is a huge one. This drives a lot of the work that we do. It starts very early. It includes a lot of folks, and so a lot of them are here tonight, so thank you. And thank the central office staff and the building principals and other administrators that have really been a part of this process for a long time and have responded very quickly when we throw random questions at you at all hours of the day. And I'll thank the board because some of this work really started at this summer's retreat when we started talking about the work of the board. And so I wanted to start tonight with the mission of the schools. And you know, every time I read this mission was created a while ago, but every time I read it, it resonates, it's current, it's present. It really does drive and speak to the work that we do. We're going to spend a lot of time over the next 2 weeks talking about numbers and percents, but all of those things are really a means to an end, and this is really the work that we do. And without the budget behind it, it would be very difficult to do this work. So I just want to just keep this in the forefront. And this year, obviously, we had some fiscal pressures outside of the district that we had to keep in mind. We want to weigh those against the work outlined in the vision. I want to preserve the legacy of this school district, the quality of the education here, the education that's built by the faculty, the staff, the board, and the education that our community expects. When we go through this process, our goal is always to provide a fiscally responsible budget. I think this year it's more of a challenge because we have some pressures by Hartford and other places. But the goal is really to continue to provide quality results, to provide this community with a return on their investment. We recognize every morning when we wake up, this is the largest investment that this community makes, and we want to make sure that they get a quality return on that. I'll outline a little bit of the challenges and then kind of go through the assumptions and pieces. So we start with priorities. Obviously, that priority is to empower students. Wherever they go after they leave us, we want to make sure that they're prepared to do that Most of our students will change their mind multiple times, and it shouldn't matter if we give them a good foundation. We want to make sure to give the educators, the people that work with our students every day, that are the face of this school district, the resources they need to deliver that instruction, whether it be professional learning, whether it be materials and supplies. We want to make sure that they're provided with what they need. I want to deliver to the public a clear and accurate and transparent budget so that people can have honest conversations about what's in there and create confidence in the process. Hopefully, we're going to continue to tweak the format. You'll see some changes. This year, we added that companion document, and that added some context to what those budget lines, what's in them, how it's contained, provides some specific and some detail. We removed a bunch of those dividers that had like one page behind them. And then we broke out adult education, so that's still in the DOI section where it's always been, but it's been broken out so you can kind of see the standalone costs. I figured we'd start to capture some of the work, so we took that mission and vision, and then this summer developed theories of action. Those theories of action were about student learning. They were about creating student-centered cultures in our buildings. They were about developing our administrators that sit here as instructional leaders and creating experiences to support student aspirations. Through those, our strategic objectives, that's what this budget supports. The idea for our teachers to have quality curriculum that they understand, that they have resources and support to implement, that they have instructional leaders that understand what's happening in the classroom and can have high-level conversations about that instructional practice, that we maintain our technology infrastructure, our facilities infrastructure, so that we have safe schools that provide what students need, and then we have lots of instructional paths for students to pursue as they move through our school district. The budget cycle includes these different stakeholders, that we have teachers who have individual goals, we have principals that builds consensus within their building and have school goals, we have your goals as a Board of Education, and district initiatives, and all of those really go to support the student, and that's a changing student, whether they be in pre-K or in our 18 to 21-year-old program. And then to keep current those theories of action, and then to lay that lens that has really been helpful as a school district as we look for the work that we do to create centers of student belonging, to create a sense of aspiration, that our students have an idea of why they come to school every day, that they have some plan, some idea of what they do after school, and that this isn't just a place that my parents tell me I have to be, and then obviously academic programs that allow our students to grow and develop. Some return on investment pieces. We've had a 203% increase in AP enrollment over the last 7 years. A very large percentage of our students participate in our extracurricular activities, whether they be the performing arts or athletics or the clubs that we've added. Our mathematics achievement continues to grow, and a lot of that comes through the support of the board and the work we've done around professional development the last few years. Our graduation rate continues to increase with a 93.4%. We have this year spent a lot of time on social emotional health and implementing programs and supports for students and families. Our SAT performance continues to outperform the state, and our DERG averages in both math and language arts. And we've seen an 11% growth in math over the last 2 years and a 40% increase in language arts. And then our college readiness score, which is a score created by multiple different organizations, and the State Department is one of the indicators that we are accountable to. That score continues to rise, and it closes the gap within our DERG. For the last few years, we've had a gap between our college readiness score and where our DERG or our districts like us are. And a lot of that, in part, is due to the growth in SAT performance and the growth in AP enrollment. I don't always like to talk about the per student cost in districts because I think there's a lot of nuance to it, but I thought it was apropos as we talk about the cuts New Milford's taking from State Department funding, and we talk about the return on investment to this community. And so This chart here shows the New Milford per pupil spending, which is at the 14,574. Our DIRG average, a DIRG is an indicator where it looks at things like average per capita income, it looks at housing costs, it looks at kind of the family structures in a town, your poverty rate. It's all these indicators put together, and then we look at districts like us. And so districts like us have an average per student cost of $15,701, and the state average is over $17,000. And I don't tell you this to say we should raise our per student cost or that we're underfunded. I tell you this because I'm very proud of the work that this district's able to do for a much lower cost than our peers are. And so when we talk about a return on investment, I think this community should be proud of the school system they have and what we're able to do with those efficiencies. And so I'm just going to chuck through these two because the fourth bullet, which should be up now. So what I wanted to point out, though, is the orange and the gray. So if we were to take a student enrollment of 3,997 students, and add the difference between the New Milford per student rate and the DIRG per student rate, we would have to increase our budget by $4.5 million just to reach the average per student spending of our DIRG. And if you wanted to meet the state average, you'd have to raise our budget $5.8 million, and that would put us at the average per student cost. And so when we look at a budget of $64 million and we see the cost of that budget, what I would tell you is that we're $5 million less than the state average, and we're performing at or above the state average in most of the indicators. And so, again, I don't say that as a, poor us or saying that we want our budget to, I'd like $5 million, but, we could do a lot with that. But that's not the purpose. The purpose here is to really reinforce the idea that the return on investment for this community, the impact they get for their tax dollars is taken seriously, and that we do a pretty good job with the resources we have. And now we can talk about some cost efficiencies. So over the past 3 years, we've cut more than 13 FTE, staff members in this district. We've spread out projects on our 5-year capital, so we've extended or deferred some of those projects. We've renegotiated contracts. We've worked with vendors to find efficient pricing. We've invested in electrical efficiencies. We've managed healthcare costs, and I'm pretty proud of the healthcare management that we've done in this district to mitigate market increases. Healthcare goes up. I would argue that our healthcare goes up at a lower rate than the market trend. And we are functioning at a fairly high level with a leaner staff than our peers. The budget that I'm going to go through, and this comes up a lot, what's not in the budget, what's on the cutting room floor, and my slides are reversed here, so I'll try to catch up. So most of the cuts that we made in June of last year have been maintained. So those cuts we made $750,000 in cuts in June of last year. A few of those kind of had to be reset based on actual costs, but most of those were pushed forward. In 2015, when the high school had a NEASC visit, they recommended a second library media specialist. We've deferred that for another year. This is, I think, the third or fourth year, since 2015, that we've deferred that. We have not added additional social workers to our schools. We have not added a pre-K-5 special ed supervisor. So currently we have a special ed supervisor at the high school. We are finding the increased needs in social emotional growth or social emotional needs and crisis in our elementaries. This is something we're exploring, but we did not add it at this time. We've talked a little bit about the need to create an alternative high school. Again, not something that made it into this year's budget. The Veritime system is the system we use for hourly employees to clock in and out. It does not communicate with our financial system. And so it is a burden on the finance department to go. There's a lot of kind of human contact that has to go through and validate all of the timesheets that come in from these systems to make them talk to each other. It's extremely inefficient. but the cost of migrating out of it is probably six figures, and so we're not moving right now. That's, again, something that's deferred. We added no additional staff to support curriculum instruction. Again, when we compare ourselves to our peers and we look at things like instructional coaches, we look at things like curriculum supervisors, we don't have those positions currently. They're not in this budget. We did not increase our capital budget. We kept it flat. We've made no reductions to our gifted program. We've made no reductions to our music program, our athletic programs. Again, we're building a fiscally responsible, lean budget, and we're trying to come in as low as possible and really maintain what we have and not erode what we have. We have no curriculum mapping software in the district. Again, when we compare to our peers of some of the resources available to staff, that's something that our staff doesn't currently have. We've managed this far without it. That's something that, again, is on the cutting room floor. Budget challenges. The 17-18 budget relief, this happens anytime we use the internal service fund or other town assets to offset our medical. It's fantastic. It brings the budget down, but it also creates a hole as you build next year's budget because we don't have any confidence at this point or reassurance that that money will be put back in. Should it be restored, that happens at the town council level. So until that happens, we accommodate that and we build for it. So that's 0.4 of the 2.59 increase is just making up for that hole. Our employees have moved to a high deductible health plan. 100% of our employees are on one. That being said, insurance is a huge driver. It accounts for more than a 50% increase of our total budget. So that 2.5% increase, more than half of that is driven solely by medical insurance increases. And that's with 100% of our employees moving to a high deductible health plan. We are aggressively working to control the costs without accounting for increased risks. I'm going to talk a little bit about where some of those increased risks are. And again, that's something that we can talk about, whether or not you're comfortable with those risks. What becomes a challenge if you want to protect staff and programs and have a budget increase that keeps in mind the pressures the town's under. And then in the past, we've moved money from our capital account, our reserves, to fund projects in our operating costs. This isn't something we want to do long-term. We want to keep the capital reserve for emergency expenses and not fund day-to-day. I make the analogy, you don't want to go grocery shopping with a credit card. You know, once in a while maybe it's okay, but it's not a good habit to be on. You really want to fund your operating budget with your internal revenue, not external revenue. And so we start that process here. So the framework that we work on, these assumptions, we constantly look to implement cost efficiencies. We look through curriculum and instructional needs, the health, safety, and facility concerns. Again, if our schools aren't safe, then we can't educate students. Class size practices, we look to what our comfort level is and what we can live with. We have to comply with federal and state mandates. Some of them are increasing. Obviously, we have to comply with collective bargaining agreements, and we want to fund our maintenance and technology plans. If we defer those, at some point we run into a crisis. We worked really hard a couple years ago to kind of reset that process, and we don't want to erode where we're at. Here's kind of the obligatory pie chart and the breakdown of where things are. Salary is 59% of the budget. I would argue that that is a smaller amount than many of our peers. We're able to manage some of those costs, benefits, transportation, and energy. Those are the big drivers of our budget. You can see that all other really account for 14% of the overall budget. If you want to reduce this budget, where you have to go is salary and benefits. And the only way to really reduce benefits at this time is to reduce the number of people receiving them. Our collective bargaining contracts, so about 75% of our operational costs are in this area. This is what we do. We hire people. Hopefully, I think we do a pretty good job hiring people. We have very good people here. Due to the efficiencies and staff reductions, the salary increase is only rising 0.15%. That's obviously less than 1/4% of the entire budget increase is really tied to salaries. So of that 2.59% increase, 0.15 is salary. And a lot of that is achieved through staff reductions that we'll go over. For the budget cycle, the main healthcare offset has been really working with the negotiating committee and the teachers union to change their healthcare plan. And that brings it down to a 10% increase, which, on any other planet would sound like a high number, but in the healthcare world, that's actually pretty good. And last year, our increase was 15%. So the fact that we're able to mitigate those cost increases is a huge impact to this budget and a savings to this community. The healthcare increase in this budget is $778,000. Again, that's more than 50% of the overall entire budget increase. And 250,000 of the 778 is really the whole that was made by the offset last year. And so, again, should the community continue to use some internal service fund resources to subsidize the school budget, that would close that hole. But until that happens, that's something that we have to account for in our budget. Health insurance, this is the breakdown of health insurance. The total benefit increase is about 7.5%. Health insurance for all bargaining units is 10.3%. The rate increase is given to us by the actuarial firm that works with the town. That's not something that we create internally. We get the number, we put it in. All board employees, 100% of them, are now part of a high deductible health plan with an HSA or health savings account. The custodial and maintenance, they're on an insurance plan through the Teamsters or in their union. It's not supported. It's not owned by the town, but we do make a contribution to that cost. Disability, we're pretty proud of disability. It's 8.8% this year, but you remember last year we had a spike of about 40%. So that was kind of a one-time spike, and now it's been readjusted down to 8%. Life insurance goes up at 5%. Unemployment, we've been able to capture some savings in unemployment, partly because unemployment nationally is at such a low rate. And then the pension is going down. The pension's another place. None of our teachers are part of the pension plan. All of our teachers are part of the state pension plan. Our non-bargaining unit is part of the town pension, and that number is budgeted on the town side and given to us. It's not something that we calculate over here. And this little slide here is about 1.2% of the year-to-year increase. Again, of the 2.5 total increase, this is 1.2, this little box right here. So now we're going to talk a little bit about risk. And so this is a little nuanced. I'm going to explain it a little bit tonight. We'll go into more detail when Mrs. Olson presents next week. And it's something that I want to talk about. So what you see here is the projected private cost in blue every year, and then the actual in orange. And so out-of-district placement is an expensive component of our budget. These are New Milford students that go to schools other than New Milford for special ed reasons, and the district is responsible for the cost. If you read the newspaper, this is what's driving Brookfield, it's what's driving Ridgefield. It's a difference in kind of what they've anticipated and what their actuals are. And so you'll see that over the last few years, our projected and our actuals have come in higher than projected. That being said, we've been able to absorb these costs through budgeting. We've not frozen the budget. We've not had to go to the town council and ask for a special appropriation like Brookfield and Ridgefield are having to do right now. The risk that we're taking, and we've been able to every year absorb, you'll see that on average we get somewhere around 4.5% more than we expect. And it's ranged from a low of 3 to a high, I think it was 9. But that's the range. And so what we're budgeting for is in that 2018-19, the 42 is kind of where we're at. Probably what we should be, you know, if we really want to take no risk, we probably should be around that 46. There's a lot of nuance that goes into what it costs because there's not like a clear cost. It could range from 10,000 to 350,000. And so you don't know where, and that's kind of the front pages of the newspaper around those swings that districts are having to absorb. So we could be super conservative and budget more towards the 46, 47 and have a 3.8% budget increase. Or we can budget a little more conservatively or aggressively, I guess you'd say, and look at the year we had the fewest increase in unanticipated out-of-district placements at 3 and be more in that range. This little slide here and that circle is where a lot of the risk in this budget is. And again, we've been able to mitigate this cost for the past 5, 6, 7 years. We're anticipating being able to do that moving forward, but literally this swings on, could be any minute of any day. Somebody moves in, some email happens, something changes, and we're no longer able to provide services for these students. This changes. Someone moves into town that's already placed in another community, and this is kind of the Ridgefield, if you've been following the press, they had several families move into town. They had to absorb the costs of the schools that those students were already in, and that's they have a $1.2 million special appropriation that they're going to be going, I think tonight, they're at the Board of Finance talking about a special appropriation of $1.2 million. There is no kind of, I'll pull up my Wall Street, past performance is not an indicator of future returns type message. There's no way to 100% insulate against this, but this slide, I want to be clear, and we'll talk more about it as we go through this process. This is where we're taking some risk. We feel that it's an appropriate risk and that we can mitigate most of it, if not all of it, based on what we know now. Again, that could change. And this is something that we watch literally every day as to where we're at and what anticipated costs we have. But when we talk about a 2.5% budget increase, you have to assume some risk or you have to cut programs. And our choice was to assume some risk here because this may happen. If we cut programs to keep the budget number down, those will definitely happen. And our thought was may happen is better than definite. Enrollment-driven reductions. Here's the enrollment chart that you saw back in November with the actual enrollment over time and the projected future enrollment. So far, our projected and actual trends have been very close, and so we're confident that these trends will continue. You've seen that at Sarah Noble over the past couple years, if you go back to 2016 through next year, they'll have been reduced by 149 students. And in that same time, they'll have lost 11 students, and that's total net. That is not, sorry, yes, 149 students, 11 teachers. And that accounts for some of the positions that we've added in, whether or not they're in the budget or not. The interventionist that's there is paid for through a grant, and that is not captured in here. So, really more than 11 teachers have been moved out of Sarah Noble in a very short time. So when people say we have declining enrollment and we haven't reduced staff, all you have to do is look to this building and the number of staff that are not here. And then kind of the other question is, well, can we expect to see this same thing happen as this trough of students moves through the middle school? And the way the middle school is structured, in a middle school environment where you have a team of teachers, you have to get a critical mass before you can't remove like a K-5 environment where you can move one section at a time. In the middle school, you really have to move 4 sections at a time. And so the math works differently. And so kind of my warning for the future is that I feel that as Sarah Noble starts to flatten out in their enrollment decline, we're not going to be continuing to be able to pull the number of staff out of this building in the future that we have over the last few years. And so it's worked for this year, but I don't know that in next year's budget presentation we'll have the same type of offset for staffing. In order to get that, here's your class size kind of comparisons. You'll see that at Hill and Plain, There's really no change. It looks like you're going to see an adjustment of a reduction of a first grade teacher that will move to second grade, but a zero net change in Hill and Plain with an overall class size of about 19.2. They're at 18 this year. If you look at Northville, you'll see the reduction of a kindergarten teacher. We took that, remember we added a teacher last year for this school year, and the numbers didn't quite hit projection. And so we're removing that, and we're also removing a second grade teacher. And so you'll see a net decrease of 2 at Northville, and their class size moves from an average of 18.3 to an average of 20. At Sarah Noble, that's where the biggest shift is. You'll see a net reduction of 5 staff members, 1 at grade 3, 2 at grade 4, 2 at grade 5. And then you can see that their average class size moves from 21.4 to 22.6, with the biggest shift really happening, I would say, in 5th grade, with a move to an average class size of 24. When we look at how we compare to our DERG, we still feel that although that's starting to get kind of towards the top of our comfort zone, we still feel that that is a reasonable number. And again, when you start to look at how do you bring in a budget at 2.5%, you're going to have to find offsets for that budget. And we feel that class size, again, protects programs. It doesn't reduce any access to any current program that a student may have, and allows us to bring in a fiscally responsible budget and reduce staff. Kind of to summarize, we're going to add 1 teacher to Schaghticoke. That is a state mandated bilingual teacher. Once you reach 20 students in any single language, it is state law that you have to have a bilingual teacher in that building. Next year at Schaghticoke, we will hit 20 students, and so we are required to add 1 bilingual teacher to Schaghticoke. We really have almost 9.5 reductions. It's skewed a little bit in that 1.4 of those reductions have been taken this year. Remember, we had 2 kindergarten teachers at Hill and Plain this year. We removed 1 of them back in August. We also reduced the .45 transition coordinator at Schaghticoke back in, I think it was September or October. So those kind of carry forward into next year's budget. That's 1.45 reductions. We have another 7 reductions. Then when you add in the bilingual teacher, you have a net gain or net reduction of 8.45 staff positions year to year. Operating capital, the capital reserve, and 5-year plans, which there you go. So our 5-year capital plan was funded this year through the capital reserve. We had $322,500 taken from the capital reserve, used as revenue in our budget, and it offsets the 5-year capital plan. I think that is good short-term, but I think that is a long-term ineffective way to budget. I think a lot of those things in our capital plan should be part of our operating budget. They're things that we should be doing on an annual basis. Some of them are replacement cycles for technology, they're repairs through the facilities budget. Those are things that we shouldn't kind of be putting on our credit card. They should be part of our operating budget. If we were to take that whole shift in 1 year, that would have a kind of dramatic effect on our budget, about 0.5%. And so we took 1/3 of that. So that we had the same proposal, by the way, last year, and then we abandoned that to try to bring the number down. The hope is our number's already fairly low this year, and so we can try to maintain it. If we don't change this practice, we're no longer putting in, with lean budgets, we're not putting in $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 into the capital reserve. So if we're taking $322,000 out of capital reserve and we're putting $180,000 in capital reserve, we're depleting that capital reserve on an annual basis, and eventually that number is going to get to an uncomfortable level, and if we have a problem, we're not going to have some reserve funds. So we need to kind of start to wean ourselves away from some of that practice. And again, I just talked that year-end money that we've been putting in there, we're getting tighter with our budgeting, and so there isn't kind of that cushion at the end of the year to put in there. And so that last line, we've taken $100,000 from kind of the revenue of our capital reserve. We kept the spending at 322,500 in our budget, but we're only offsetting that with 222. And so that is a 0.15 increase or shift in the budget. If we were to put that back in, that would be your impact, 0.15. So what this budget does, it certainly acknowledges the pressure this community is facing from measures outside of our control. Even though our representatives are doing a good job up there in Hartford, we cannot stop the state pressures and the impact of this community. This protects opportunities for students. This does not cut any programs currently that students have access to. It provides the materials, the equipment, the curriculum that our teachers need. We did not try to balance this budget by removing crayons and pencils or textbooks from the budget. It ensures professional development. We work in a time in education where the pressure to change, where the movement of curriculum, the number of standards that our teachers are being asked to implement is increasing in their rate. And we feel that if we reduce our professional learning for our teachers, that we're going to fall further behind our peers very quickly. Our curriculum, I just talked about curriculum and professional development. Again, the areas of risk. There's only a couple ways to do this. If we don't increase risk and decrease personnel, then the increase to our budget goes up. There really aren't that many alternatives. And so there is increased risk in here. Last year, we increased our staff turnover assumptions from 250,000 to 275,000. As our staff gets younger and our staff turnover isn't as great, we increase risk when we keep that number at the 275. That being said, we've met that number this year, and so we've kept that flat year to year. I would sleep better if we turn that back down to 250,000 in staff turnover savings, but that again would increase the budget increase percent. And so we've kept that flat at 275. And then the third thing I just went over with the migrating away from the capital reserve. What this budget doesn't do, this budget doesn't reduce any academic opportunities for students. We did not touch any art programs, any music programs. We did not reduce the program for the gifted students. We did not decrease athletic opportunities or add costs to families in athletics. We also didn't increase any instructional support for staff, and we didn't add any programs other than the one bilingual teacher that's mandated by the state, and we have not completely fulfilled the NEASC recommendations. And part of our response to NEASC will be to explain to them, which NEASC is the accrediting organization for our high school, and we'll explain to them the fiscal pressures and our priorities and why we haven't fulfilled some of their recommendations. When we build the summary, here's kind of the nuts and bolts of all the lines, the elevator pitch, if you will. Again, I'll walk across. So the percent change by object. So the percent change of the overall budget in salaries is only going up $56,000. Out of, $3.8 million, that line only goes up $56,000, which is 0.15% of the salary line. And it is, the overall cost of salaries is 59% of our budget. That's what we do. We have people. And the percent of the total. So of the 2.59, 0.09% is in salaries. Okay? So again, 50%, 59% of our budget is salary, only 0.09% of that increase is due to salary costs. And that is achieved in large part by the 8.45 reductions to people. So benefits, if you look at they're only 17.4% of the overall budget cost, but they account for 1.2% of the total increase of 2.5. So there's a lot of different percentages in there. So that last column adds up to the 2.59, and the individual percents, how you get to that 2.59. Professional services, that's We'll go through some of those pieces. Some of those are, like ESS is in that high school program. That's increasing about 1/3%. Property services are 1/10 of 1% of that 2.59. I'm going down that last column on the right. Other services account for 0.3. Supplies, of the $2 million, going up $134,000, that's 0.2%. Our capital, so there's two ways that we tried to do capital in this year's budget. So anything on the capital, the 5-year capital plan is considered capital in the way, and we broke that out, that $322,500, and that is flat. All other capital, and those are capital in buildings, so a cafeteria at Northville would fall into that other capital. It's not on the 5-year plan, but it's a capital expense. Those other capital is really where that $10,000 is increasing. So new desks at Scotticoke that Dr. Longo will talk about tomorrow night, those kinds of furniture, that's what that increase is. And so our total expenses are going up $1.5 million. Then you get to the revenue piece. So we have total expenses of $1.5 million. That accounts for about a 2.4 budget-to-budget increase. Then our revenue, and the big adjustment in that revenue line is really the $100,000 in capital reserve that we've removed from the revenue that we have in this year's budget. And so that accounts for almost all of that $81,000. And so that has kind of an inverse relationship with our budget. And so revenue, in most cases, I guess, would offset the increase. In this case, it adds to the increase. And so that additional 0.18% gets you to your 2.59. And most of these lines that I just read off is what we'll spend the next 3 nights crawling through so you can understand the pieces. So, there's a piece here that we're going to do, wringing out the sponge. Last year, the Board of Ed adopted budget was a 3.4% increase. Obviously, we weren't facing some of the same pressures from the state that we are now. If we just took that budget that we have this year, the $64 million budget, and rolled it forward, we didn't take staff reductions, we didn't take efficiencies, we would have been at 4.63%. So the budget you're looking at a 2.59 is already absorbing about $1.2 million or $1.3 million in cuts. We've already done that. The administrative team that's sitting out there has worked really hard to help crawl through this entire budget and find almost $1.33 million in cuts to get us to the 2.59 proposed budget. And where does that fit kind of in the historics? So the 8-year Board of Ed adopted budget, Board of Ed has been around 2.8%, so this is lower than the average. You can look in the year that we closed an elementary school and had $800,000 in savings, that's that 1.1, that's the 2015-16 budget. And then you can see adopted by the town. Now, one of the challenges we have is you say this is a tough year, we really need to tighten our belts. Well, when you have a budget increase of, most years of less than 1%, like our belt's already pretty tight. There aren't a lot of places we can squeeze. When we go back to the comparisons of our DIRG, we go back to that return on investment slide, we're already, by some math, and you can, play with the math a little bit, it's not an exact science, but, by that math, we're $5 million less than the state average. So when it comes time to tighten our belts, we have to create a new notch, and so that's where we want to be conscious of that process and just let the board know we want to work with you, we want to answer questions, we want to find places if you think that this isn't a number that the community can get behind. But the risk is there aren't a lot of places that we feel you can go that don't impact programs and staff. And so with that, I have the schedule up there of the next few nights. Depending on what happens with Mother Nature tomorrow, we got tonight in, it was a little sketchy there at one point, but we got tonight in. And if the storm passes in time for us to keep tomorrow night, we're going to try to do that, so we'll communicate with you tomorrow and the public. But the plan as of now would be to try to hold tomorrow night. We hope that the roads and everything will be fine by 7 o'clock. Otherwise, we have Thursday as a snow night, and then we'll kind of march through next week as well. And then with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions, and then very soon we'll turn it over to K-5 principals so they can start going through their budget.
Okay, before we entertain some questions, I just want you to know it's not limited to tonight on this presentation. You can ask for clarifications.
Anytime.
And yeah, anytime between now and the budget adoption evening. Okay, so, yeah, questions and comments? Tammy?
Are we opening up questions?
For this, yes, yes.
Okay, great.
On page number 9, Josh, well, in here, the K-1 special education out-of-district placement, what is the actual cost between being conservative and being aggressive?
Again, some of this gets into what indicators, but somewhere between 200 and 300,000.
And that's the 4% differential between the 42 and the 46?
Yes.
Can I expand on that question? Oh,
Go ahead, Shinga.
Yep,
no.
go right ahead, Wendy.
Oh. So, taking the risk in that particular area, we're basing it off of last year's actual revenues in that.
So there.
Because the formula changes for how much we ask for when the revenues change. Correct?
Correct.
Okay,
So the revenue piece of this really comes through excess costs.
right.
The numbers you see here really are driving what we can apply for excess costs.
Okay,
So there's a lot of levers that move into this piece. Excess cost is 4 times our per pupil
Right.
expenditure, and then anything over that, I think 4 times, I know that Mrs. Olson will talk more, is about $80,000. Is that
64.
64,000, sorry, 80,000.
So it's basically, I'm sorry, a deductible before we get paid.
That's right, so we have
All
a
right, we'll put it-
$64,000 deductible, and then anything over that deductible, we get reimbursed somewhere between 60 and 80 or 100%. The state is supposed to reimburse 100% over that 65,000, but
okay.
it moves. This piece really speaks to the amount of the total cost of educating a student that we have to place out, which could range from 30,000 without transportation to 300,000. And that is the challenge that our peers right now in Brookfield and Ridgefield are facing, is that, like I said, the Ridgefield one is a $1.2 million driven by students placed in special facilities that have high costs that they didn't account for.
But that's all of the special education budget per se, and that when we have a revenue adjustment in that line item, we absorbed it last year.
That's
In our
correct.
budget. And we didn't have to go back to the town or do anything on a supplemental basis, because there was a little bit of room there based on our history throughout the year. What we're doing is we're risking that.
On 2 different levers, yes.
You see where I'm saying?
So in the past, the cuts have come from the State Department through the excess cost grant.
Okay,
That's where we've been able to absorb that. But kind of the other side of that are either students in our district that develop needs that we can't reach, that we have to place out, or students that move to town that we don't know about yet. So you kind of have 2 different
Two risks,
pressures
right.
putting in there. That's right.
so basically, because we had this discussion this morning at the legislative breakfast, that other districts are struggling
Yes.
with this. It's an unknown. It can, this scale, this 42 can shift back to the 46, and
And that 46 could be, 4 students at 50,000
Of
apiece.
course.
Or 4 students at 250,000 apiece. And so this risk really is about the unknown of students who are either in our district and develop a reason that we have to move them out,
Or
or a
could
student that moves in.
come into the district.
This risk and this chart on slide 21, I
Right.
don't know if I can, really focuses on that. This isn't risk absorbed in the excess cost reimbursement from the
Got
state.
it, and we'll be talking about that in another time.
That's correct.
Okay, so I want to make sure we
Okay,
cover,
let's-
there's 2 pieces to that.
There are.
Okay.
That's
Can-
right.
Angie, I'm sorry,
That's
man,
all right.
just,
Sorry.
when do we find out as a district how much we're going to get in excess cost?
So there are three components. The first is we have to apply, and so that gets into eligible costs. We have to apply, what students do we have? You have to factor the deductible, and then we apply. So that's step one. And then in February, the state gives us part one of the check, which usually is about 75%, and you can extrapolate what the total amount's going to be. However, you could get an adjustment between February and May when the second check
Which is what
comes.
happened to us.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's the part that we had to absorb
That's
this year,
in last year's budget.
last year's budget.
This year,
Yeah, last year's budget.
It's still early,
Sorry,
we have
okay.
we have a couple of weeks left before we get that first indicator, but yes.
but that's outside of this. This is a total, this has to really do with students in or
Right.
out kind of thing.
That's correct.
Okay.
Angie, thank you for your patience.
No
Thank you.
problem. I have a couple of different questions. For the, I'm on page 6, slide 14, I believe. The library media specialist at the high school, have we added aides or anything to that library?
So there is a clerk at the library.
Okay, so is that additional since 15, or that was always there?
That was always there.
Okay, so we've not added anything at all?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the special ed supervisor for the pre-K through 5, will, at some point in the presentation, will we get information on what the increase, like from last year, of those special ed numbers, like you said the numbers went up, so is there a chart or something we're gonna be able to see to show that?
So Mrs. Olson, when she presents,
Okay.
will talk kind of about the special ed needs and pressures, yes.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question I have, the bilingual teacher, I know it's mandated.
Yep.
Is there a different job description from a regular classroom teacher for that position, or
And, yes, and a different certification.
could we get a copy of that?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
I'm sorry, and we have one bilingual teacher currently in the district.
And
So,
that's it, Hill and Plain?
It's at Sarah Noble.
Sarah Noble.
Yep.
JT?
Josh, staying on that same page, page 6 there, but I guess it's slide 14, right?
That's what it reads.
The replacement for Veritime system.
Yes.
So you said, that ends up being a very onerous, job for, central
Yes.
office to,
Yes, it does.
to track those hourly employees. I'm just curious if are there efficiencies in using Munis, and maybe are there ways to leverage what the town uses for their hourly employees? I've got to think they've got a larger, cadre of hourly employees. Is there a way to, purchasing power or whatnot, to be able to kind of leverage some of those systems there? If it all feeds into Munis too, so.
So the challenge is, so the Veritime system that we have doesn't talk directly to Munis.
Okay.
There's another system, plug vendors here, but there's another system that I believe the town's currently using, is that fair? That does speak directly to Munis. The challenge for us is to migrate from the system that we have to the system that the town is using is a substantial amount. I think it was 80,000 for the conversion, plus another 60 or 70,000 for the licensing. And so that cost versus trying to keep dollars low and looking at the work that we're doing, in the end, the decision was we'd rather do this for one more year and try to find a way to come up maybe a 2 or 3 year plan to migrate over.
And a large part of those costs versus the town cost would be for the actual physical equipment of time clock scanners, where we have more locations than the town currently has. So a lot of those built-in upfront costs are quite large.
So that
because we
outweighs
have
what
to have enough scanners at each location.
And we had our system before Munis came in, so that was kind of they did tell us they would talk to each other. I guess in some sales rep's definition, they do, but in
If you
a,
translate.
yeah, that's right, that's right.
Tammy?
Okay, thank you. Can we go back to slide 21, because I actually had a second question on that slide. Are we, in this budget, putting in for 39, but really projecting 46 with the 42 with the possibility of 46? Or is the 42 number, which is projected, what we put in for funding?
So this is the hardest part of slide 21 to explain, because there is no standard cost for, those 39 students. The cost for each of those range tremendously. Some of those students are transitioning back to the district, so that 39 is even going to change in the makeup of who those students are. And so that's the challenge. So when we say 42, we kind of average everything together and say, here's about what an average student could cost. Now, 3 students at 80,000, or 4 students, or 1 student at 200,000. So that's where like that 3-student number is, it's not an exact science, but it's something that we felt was important and wanted to present tonight and include it as part of our budget.
But are you presenting the 42,
So-
that 3 additional
so
students?
in
or
this budget
are you just
here-
rolling over the 39?
Right, so right now, we know that there are 39 students that are in our district right now, that will be in a facility outside of our district next year. Historically, we also know that that number always goes up, that the number we start with is never the number we end with. I think
And
Mrs.
you don't
Olson
think-
would
and you
sleep
don't
better
think
at
anyone's
night
coming
if we
back?
accounted for, well, the 39 does account for some coming back.
Oh,
But
okay.
it also accounts for some that we know are gonna go out.
Okay,
So the 39 are all kind of known situations.
okay,
What we know is that, again, historically, we've had at least 3 students show up during the year that we've had to move out of district. And so that's kind of like the best-case scenario when you look at our historics. The difference, though, is that I think, again, I'll not pick on Mrs. Olson, but I think she would sleep better if we took the cost equivalent and looked at 46, because that would, again, protect us against kind of a more averaged, it doesn't take in the best-case scenario, it takes in more of the
it's a conservative.
more conservative, kind of averaged assumption.
So I just want to double check, so you are, the budget looks at the 42 number, not the 39.
Correct.
Correct.
The place we would really like to be is 46
46.
if we were going to maintain 0 risk, okay?
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
yes,
this is the
I think
risk.
that's fair.
That was
This
the
is
risk.
a very
Okay, I just
big
wanted
risk.
to make sure, because I saw those 2 numbers.
Yes.
My one other question is, by not filling the position, the library position that NEASC is saying that we should, what is the consequence from NEASC?
So I think, again, that would be best practice. And I think it's important that we let the board know that we've been kind of recommended to move in that direction, and we're consciously making a decision to not make that a priority. When we respond to NEASC and we tell them about the fiscal cuts coming to the community and how we prioritize this to protect other programs and positions, that's what we're gonna put in our response to NEASC. And so I want the board to be aware that that's what we're saying. It doesn't mean the library doesn't have access to it.
But is there a penalty from NEASC? Do we not get the higher rating from
No.
NEASC? I mean, what happens?
I think if our high school, if that was one of many, like our high school did very well in NEASC with a few, with a few areas of growth. If we were in danger of losing accreditation or something like that, that would be a bigger factor. We feel that, again, in this time, it's responsible, our students have a library, we have a beautiful library, with lots of resources at the high school. We have declining enrollment, although the high school is pretty steady when you look at the chart, but eventually we feel that that's something that we can push off for a year, and when you weigh it against what it would mean to put it in, I think we decided that, we're doing without it right now, and that was kind of this budget. Here's some nice to haves, here's some things that we feel we need as a district, but the cost of putting those in versus taking something and offset out was too great.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
I'm going back to page 6.
Yeah.
I said, we like
Page
page
6.
six.
Yeah.
A lot of information.
Well, I just, page 6, yeah, of,
Page 14.
Oh,
Slide 14.
sorry,
Slide
slide
14.
Slide 14.
That's all
My
right, thank you for
apologies.
that. Yeah?
My, I see that additional social workers are on the list in the cutting room, and I know it's a societal, it's changing. Kids' emotional makeup is changing in schools, and I'm just wondering, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I'm just wondering where those social workers, I know they're not there, but where they would be if we, I'm not sure,
Yeah, I mean, I
Can
think, yeah,
Why don't we leave that as a question for them to deal with, so that when we get into, I believe it's under special ed again, and these are, let me bring that up too. Many of the questions that we have, the individual departments might be better able to answer than this evening. So if you'd be, and this would be a case where I think that would be more appropriate.
But those are good questions, especially
Yeah.
if you ask them tonight,
Then we can,
then they
yeah.
can prepare and build it into their presentation.
I agree with you,
etc.
Brian. You know, we have an opiate issue going on in this nation, this state, this county, this town. We're cognizant of that. And that's the work that we have cut out for us for the next week or so. Any other questions or comments before I move on to, go right ahead,
On the
ma'am.
slide that we have in front of us, when you have no increase to capital budgets, help me understand, we're taking, that statement is capital in total or across the board? Because we have several pieces of capital. We have some embedded through the budget, such as the furniture that you're talking about, okay? So walk me through that.
So each of our schools gets a per-student allotment.
Correct.
That they can move around in their buildings based on their individual building needs. And so any increase in capital that you see is really about how principals
Within
allocated
the
the
building.
resources.
Right.
The 322,500 that we built in capital mostly are all tied to the 5-year capital
Correct.
plan. That is flat.
Okay, that's where I'm looking for
Yes.
the piece.
And so we tried, and this is, a little nuanced, but in the front of the budget, you'll
Right.
see that we built in, and we built a tab that says
Right.
5-year capital and then other capital.
Right.
So that other capital is all school-based, and it's really about how
Probably because I
building
asked you to do it
principals.
that way.
That's okay, that's a good idea, we want to break it out that way. And it makes it easier for us to track going forward as well. So, and that 10,000 in increase that you see in that other capital is really driven by how principals allocated their per-student allotment.
But the actual revenue offset of the 322, we're taking a $100,000 hit off of that.
That's correct. If you go to the revenue
Okay.
page in the budget book and look at capital reserve offset, it's 222.5.
And can I ask what drove that decision,
The idea that,
or that recommendation?
yes, that
Thank you.
recommendation is really driven by the need, my belief, and I think I can speak for our finance director, that long-term, using that revenue offset every year out of capital reserve.
Is a crutch.
It is a crutch,
It is.
and we're not putting in equal or greater amounts back into the capital reserve, and so that's a negative draw.
drawing it down.
Yeah, and
We're
that
drawing it
continues
down.
to draw down, and it's gonna put pressure on our capital reserve. That capital reserve is somewhat unique to New Milford. I think it's a fantastic asset. It creates a cushion for the Board of Finance and the town council, should something happen to a school.
Right.
And you don't need to go right to the
Right,
town
no.
for a special appropriation, but if we keep drawing it down to fund what I consider operating capital, then it's not going to be there when we have a $500,000 expense that was not planned for.
Yeah, I think that's something that this board, I know as long as I've been on it, we've had this discussion of moving many of the items from capital expenditures, which is a one-time expenditure, to
And
our.
now looking at, in other words, drawing the account down basically to
Right,
keep
and
our
putting it
numbers
in
low.
our operating
But
budget.
that's the
For
same
example,
conversation we're having with the special ed. Some of this is really about risk-taking.
Yes, it
It's
is.
about moving from one account to
Right.
the other.
Yep.
You're trying to look, a year out to to take from one line and keep the numbers low and come in with a, 2.5 budget when other towns are coming in at 6.4, 9.0, and 4.7. So,
And to do it all at once would have been a little more than, or about 0.5%. So you would move from a 2.5 to a 3.01 or something like that.
that's it for me.
Any others?
And with that, I can say, welcome to our elementary principals.
Okay. Thank you for coming this evening. I know you look forward to this every year. But feel free to give us some of your highlights of the year, that have been many, and I know we've been made cognizant of many of them, but some of them sometimes slip by us and we can use a refresher. This is on behind me, isn't it? Yeah, it is.
movie seat there.
Do you have this, a copy of this available?
Can I have one of those minis?
Do we have a copy of it?
Absolutely.
Probably.
Printed copy?
Yes.
We can get one made before the end of the month.
Well, thank you very much for having us here this evening. I'm Susan Murray from Northville. This is Ann Bilko from Sarah Noble and Paula Kelleher from Hill and Plain. And we'll get started here. Again, we have our mission statement, and this guides our work every day, and focusing on that, on our students, and helping them to develop that resilience and dealing with all the changes that are happening in their world every day, and helping them to develop a growth mindset to embrace those challenges, and then building the culture of respect and kindness in all of our schools. And we thank you for giving us this time to present to you, and then also for all of your support through all the years. So in many ways and in many languages. All right. Very first thing are K-5 academic highlights that we wanted to go over here. We have our Teachers College, or TC, units of study for writing and reading that we've been implementing this past year, and will continue to implement in all three schools. We have the exemplars work that we've been doing in connection with math investigation. So exemplars takes the math investigation program and kicks it up a notch for more challenging thinking and a higher level of critical analysis. We are in our second year of co-teaching, which means we have special education teachers pushing into regular education classrooms and teaming with regular education teachers. So teachers are planning together, teaching together, and having a great impact on both special education and regular education, so that those special education students are in the regular ed classroom, and lower performing students in the regular education classroom have the chance to benefit from special education strategies and lessons. We have the integration of our science units using mystery science, and we really want to highlight Susan Brawford, who is our K-5 science enrichment teacher. She's really opened up mystery science for our teachers to really enrich on many levels science in the classroom, and then also for those students that need that extra challenge outside of the classroom. We're implementing, again, continue to implement scientific research-based intervention, SERBI, process and implementation in all of our schools, and the What I Need or WIN time for reading and math intervention and enrichment to fill in some gaps here and there that students may have, or to stretch students who are at a proficient level and need to deepen their understanding. And then we have interventionists, reading teachers working with our K2 math and reading students who need a little bit more in Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction, what we often call a second hit. And then the need for intervention programs in English language arts and math. So we have the Bridges program that we are proposing to purchase out of the upcoming budget, and then the foundations, which is being used by our reading specialists for Tier 3 reading services for those students who need more intensive reading instruction to bridge the gap between the general education reading and their particular reading needs. So we have a lot of initiatives, and as you can see, and these will evolve over time, and they will take time. So these are things that we're going to be working on for the next several years.
Just
No,
changing this.
middle button.
Okay. Oops, this is out of order.
Okay.
Did I mess it?
Yeah, go back. How do I go back? I think this one. Yeah.
Oh, great, okay, thank you. All right, so, talking about what Susan has presented, there are a lot of initiatives. As Josh mentioned, standards are becoming more rigorous. There's a lot of change in research and into instructional practice. So, professional learning is really of the utmost importance, and it's got to be something that's ongoing and embedded into our workday. One of the ways that we train our folks is through a first Thursday of the month meeting. Most of those meetings are devoted to us learning about data teams. Previously, though, this year, they were open up to other kinds of topics as well. Some are coach-led, some are teachers working in grade levels, looking at their programs intensively to try to understand them and kind of calibrate on them. We have math, literacy, and data coaches that push into our PLCs. Those are meetings that teachers engage in once every 6 weeks. And we also have, I think it's embedded in, oh, no, okay. Yep, they're in there, let's see, I'm sorry, I can't see, this is terrible. All right. PLC meetings as well as daily coaching and Thursday PD meetings. So teachers have a lot to calibrate on. In language arts, we're now using TC materials. Teachers are assessing students with TC running records in the area of reading, and there's a lot of training that needs to be done so that they all understand it to the same level and can implement it the same way. Math has a lot of benchmark assessments where the kids have to show their thinking, and there's a rubric that we kind of judge, and coding that we judge the children's responses on. So again, teachers want to be calibrated within those two subject areas. Writing as well, we have on-demand challenges, so those are used with a rubric as well. And so teachers are really trying to be very careful that they're all gauging their students' work in the same way. Tuesday PLC meetings happen once every 6 days, and this gives the grade levels a chance to collaborate on common goals. The children's specials are aligned so that the teachers have time to meet while the kids are in their specials. Co-teaching was already mentioned. Co-teaching and foundations are related to our special ed population mostly. In co-teaching, we have one gen ed, at least one gen ed and one special ed person per team in our two buildings. And I know Ann has, I'm sure, probably more than that. And the idea is to keep these kids in the regular ed setting and bring the special ed teacher in there to be able to help the regular ed teacher keep those children in the setting, and also to catch kids that might be low performers and kind of prevent them from, going down the special education road. Foundations is a reading program that teachers are using for special ed population students. It's very focused on decoding, a lot of comprehension too, but very focused on the foundational skills. And with those two programs, there's a lot of out-of-district training. Coaches come into the district to train, and we give teachers, planning time, maybe once every 6 weeks, to sit down together and plan. Positive behavior intervention supports. As we've noted over the years, children are coming to us with a range of difficulties, and we want to make sure that these kids are in a positive environment, feeling safe in our environment. And so this is an initiative where we work on creating a climate of trust and safety. There's a an electronic component to this, a database where we can actually take discipline referrals, enter them in, and then we can take a look and see at the different venues that problems might be arising. So we can run reports that let us know our areas of concern happening on the playground mostly. Is there a certain time of day that we seem to get more referrals than others? You know, is it more boys or girls? There's so many different factors that you can look at and kind of shoot out reports so that we can be proactive and make some changes in those venues to help kids behave a little bit more positively. Foundations coaching we talked about. We also have K through 3 CERC personnel coming in. They're training us in common formative assessments for our English language arts program. So teachers will teach a while and then they'll stop. They'll give the kids a little brief assessment that lets them adjust their teaching before they go on further. So they're tiny little probes that are periodic. And, you know, we mentioned this year after year, kids come to us very differently every year, and there's a lot that we need to do to support them emotionally. 2 years ago, the board approved a full-time guidance counselor. Our person was 3 days a week in our buildings, but now she's 5 days, and that's really helped tremendously. When counselors were only in the building for 3 days, that whole time was pretty much consumed with their developmental guidance program, which is great, but it didn't leave the time that they use now for small groups, phone calls, crisis kinds of help with our students. They also take care of accommodations 504 students, which are kids that aren't special ed, but they have other accommodations that so they run the meetings for those. Zones of Regulation is a program that's used mostly in our BIP program, but in other programs and classrooms too. And basically, it's a preventative program. Kids are taught, you know, what zone they're in. Are you in the green, yellow, or red? And the idea is to make them aware before their behavior escalates, and they learn where they are and then the strategies that they can implement to get them back to green so that they're functioning appropriately. Nurtured Heart approach is very simple. It's 3 stances that we started the year with. It teaches us that we have to have clear expectations, and then we have to not engage. If kids are misbehaving or bantering back and forth, you keep a very level, calm approach, don't engage, and then you always focus heavily on the positive. You know, one correction deserves 4 positives to keep those kids feeling that they're still respected by you. We have small group work that happens with our guidance counselor and our social worker, lunch bunch groups, more formal social skills learning, family groups. We just finished a K through 2 school-wide book study on mindset for learning, and that's all about growth mindset. We teach the kids that yet is one of the most important words that they can learn, because they might not understand a concept yet, but doesn't mean that they're not going to. And we really try to impress upon them that, you know, mistakes are simply information, and anybody can learn given the right kind of circumstances. So, you know, we try to follow the research which says if you make kids feel capable, then they can succeed. And then finally, we have purposeful play happening in the kindergarten classrooms. It's an opportunity for the children to explore. They explore roles as they play in different stations. They explore spatial relationships when they're working with blocks. It's a good time for the teacher to help children navigate socially, because not all kids know how to play nice and navigate one another. So the teachers are there watching and stepping in as appropriate to kind of teach them how they can get along. And with that, Ann is going to talk a little bit more in terms of community and highlights.
Great. And again, thank you for the opportunity. We're happy to be here and share a little bit with you about the great things that are happening in our schools all the time. Some of the, within the school community highlights is we continue to look at that sense of belonging, and we found that the increasing those intramurals, 3-5, the increase in student activities in 3-5 at Sarah Noble, morning arrival and recess is really building those connections between children beyond just in their classroom. They're meeting buddies that they might not know. They're building relationships beyond the kids who might be on their bus and in their class. And so those are really great things that we continue this year. We're constantly working on character education. District-wide, we have a character trait each month. But each of our individual buildings has ways to get at character education. I know if you're at Sarah Noble, you've seen a lot of hands. We have a lot of good character traits on our hands. And it's a way for us to help our children grow into those good citizens that we want them to be. PBIS is in each of the schools now, and you heard Mrs. Kelleher speak a little bit about that. And that's something that's ongoing and really constantly looking at how can we better support our students. What is it that we're not understanding about what motivates their behavior, and how can we address that? And then one of the things that we're very proud of with the school community is school gardens. Really nice opportunity for children to do some outside of the classroom learning, literally outside of the building learning. A nice way for them to interact with each other, with science, with nature, and so those are really positive things within the school. In the greater community, we all spend a lot of time with Veterans Day. It's a really important day for us as K-5 educators. It's important that we share those veteran stories with children who literally were not alive for most of the things that we're talking about. It's important for them to understand that level of service, so we spend a good deal of time on that day. And then additionally, each of the grade levels have a grade level service project, and they change from time to time, but they try to choose something that's different from the other grades around them. And again, to give children a sense of the greater world around them, the needs of people, how can we relate to them, and how can we help them in their circumstances and their challenges. And so beyond the specific grade level service projects, we also have school-wide service projects like the First Friday food drive that goes right here to New Milford to our social services. And we have a lot of students, so if they all bring in a can of something, that's a lot of food. And we try to celebrate those successes and explain to children how that can help, like one being a small part of a large community focused on helping others is a positive thing, so we're really proud of that as well. This year we are increasing our work with the Lions Club. Lions Club vision screening through Kids Site has been happening at the elementary schools, and this year we're going to increase, actually in a couple of weeks, we're going to increase, is coming soon to Sarah Noble, we're going to increase that to Sarah Noble, and that's a great organization and a good opportunity to work with the Lions Club. And then all of us coming up in the near future have Read Across America, and each of the buildings look at that differently, but what I tell students often is reading is our muscle sport in K-5. It's the most important work that we do. So that is obviously a very big day for us, Read Across America. Okay, so a couple, you just heard a lot of information very quickly, and we thought it's worthwhile to share a couple of notes as you look at our budgets. The first one of the big numbers that you might jump off the page at you is the math investigations. And just a reminder that last year we spent some time explaining that was a 3-year contract. We're in the second year of a 3-year purchase agreement, and that was the best way to get the best price. So you will see that, and that does include everything, the consumable journals that the kids use, the online resources that both the children and the parents can use, and the parents can go on and get an explanation of something if they're not clear on what their child is working on. Additionally, I really commend the Board of Education for supporting the investment in Teachers College. That curriculum is first class in every way, and now we're supporting that curriculum by buying these Teacher College libraries. And they really are spot on in helping us deliver that curriculum. We continue to grow the number of grade level sets that we have. a little bit over time. So this year, each grade level will have at least 2 on-grade level sets, and we will build some below grade level sets for children that need that intervention. At both Northville and Hill and Plain schools, the book trucks for TC libraries are also in the budget. So we don't have book trucks at Sarah Noble yet, but maybe in the future one day we'll be driving trucks as well. And then finally, one of the things that we think is so important in our district is transitioning our students from K2 to Sarah Noble to Scotticoke, and that is something that we pay attention to all the time. We build in field trips for the current second graders, my future third graders, to come up and see the schools, because we really want children to arrive at their next designation and feeling really comfortable and excited about their new school. So we do build in a lot of things around that so that they arrive at their next school feeling ready and familiar with physical space and some of the things that they can expect at that next school. Okay. Things, if the 3 principals said, what are the real, the real keys to K-5 student success? And as I said on the last slide, that TC curriculum, the TC program, and supporting that TC work is some of the finest work that certainly I've seen. It's just remarkable what our teachers have been able to do with that quality curriculum. They're doing a fabulous job. And the other key to that is if you're going to make a huge lift in curriculum, as we did, that embedded PD by the instructional coaches is invaluable. The curriculum, the guidance that they give our teachers in curriculum, kind of plow the road ahead of our teachers to make sure that they're prepared for what's coming. It really has been invaluable to the success of that program, and really important part of what we do every day. And then the other key to success is that intervention to support students. And that's both academically and socially emotionally. When we have that quality intervention, I would say, like, we can fill a shallow pothole and get the child right back on track on that main road. When we don't have that quality intervention, then that pothole gets bigger and bigger sometimes. So I think supporting that intervention is really critical to student success. And that is what we've prepared ahead of time, but what we're really looking forward to is answering your questions. Anything that needs clarification or something you'd like to ask us, we'd love to answer.
Thank you.
You're most
I'm
welcome.
very
Thank you for having us.
I'm very pleased that you didn't have to get an individual set on all 3 schools. That's that the programs are district-wide, quite frankly, and I think that's a wonderful thing because many districts, well, don't. Okay, why don't? Sure, go right ahead.
I feel a little embarrassed asking this, but what is a book truck?
We're gonna ask those ladies the book truck question.
They're like the library carts that you
So they
push
visit the
them, and
classroom?
there's shelves on wheels, basically. Yeah, it's really nice.
Okay, I was going to go to the your tab for Hill and Plain, and if anybody has any questions, I'll go through page by page for you, and of course, anything that, you have on the presentations or something like that again. And, okay, I'm on page 1.
Just a commentary, I do like the yes, with all of the breakdown for line items. Often we
Yes.
go through them line by line and we're parceling out a line.
Right.
Even though it's $500, you stop counting the 500s, you lose track of the thousands. But this makes it a lot easier to define what is in each line, so I appreciate that.
Yes.
I have a question about this.
Page 1, yes, sir.
I think that was my question last year, too, page 1.
Yes.
And it was a population increase question. And ironically, here we go again. So I see that we have a population increase, a positive 5 for pre-K and 33 for K. Where did those numbers come from?
So currently, they come from the projections done by Malone and McBroom. And those are, I think we're at, this projection is at year 5. And as they get further out, they get less reliable. The conversation that we should entertain in the next 2 years is whether or not we're happy with the demographic study or if it's time to do a new one.
Yeah, I'll just interject there, and this is why we're very reliant on the enrollment numbers in October, first week of October.
We moved kindergarten enrollment up this year, and hopefully that shift earlier in the year will allow us more time just to monitor that. Kindergarten is the most volatile.
Right.
After that, we're much more stable and comfortable in our numbers.
But that being said, you go on to Northville and you're down 10, and you go on to Sarah Noble and you're down 61.
Yeah.
So it,
You're going to have bubbles and peaks and valleys,
exactly.
and, that nice straight line is usually non-existent in a school population.
But overall, the district is estimated to be down.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then that, if you
80
go back to
some odd
my
students.
presentation, I have the
Okay.
line chart there, but the kindergarten one, I would say, is the one that we struggle with the most.
Sure.
So that one, because you don't have any actuals, when you talk to preschools, kindergarten registration will help, but usually come August 1st, we monitor that daily, as we get closer to the school year.
Okay.
But, sorry, just for the
Yeah.
students there, then we have, we just roll them forward.
We look at
So the
trends.
106 to 140, I just see if they.
That's right, if you look diagonally,
Right.
you'll see, at times we have other information that informs that, but yes, for the most part, our historical trend of student population is not a massive shift. When you get to the high school, for example, we know about how many students a year from Scotticoco to Nanawag or go to private schools, so that impacts. But really, from grade 1 through grade 8, we have a pretty stable population, and so unless there's other information driving that, for the most part, it's kind of that diagonal shift. And if you look at the Malone and McBroom numbers, they mirror that.
I'm curious, have we ever kind of looked at the integrity of the cohorts that we have? So I would say like a K3 or K2 cohort, let's say at the elementaries, and we look at maybe Sarah Noble cohort integrity from 3-5. Do we see just maintaining the cohort forward? Are we looking at a 95% cohort integrity, or are we looking at, more transient, maybe like an 80 or
So,
something?
like, I want to say 2 years ago, we looked at graduating high school seniors and how many of them started kindergarten here.
Oh, sure, that's a big one, but
So we
that's
look
the
at kind
13-year
of that
club.
cohort,
Right.
right. I'll get that, I'll get some of that for you.
Because I think that might be good projection-wise too, to say, do we maintain our cohort, but also instructionally, those efforts that we, use for these students, we keep those students and we have them in district, and then it really becomes, how do we look at instructional programs across a K2, a 3-5, and how do we put those handoffs? Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Page 2. Angie?
In the certified teacher line, the 1.5 in the grant, is that in addition to the 35.495, or is that included in that number?
In addition, I'm gonna look at Ms. Baldelli, but I believe it's an addition. 1.5 in the grant, certified staff.
It's got to be in addition
Because
because
it's
it's being,
0.65 in the
because it's
bottom.
being offset by the grant.
Okay.
We have backup data on that we can pull for you, but
Okay, that's fine. I
I'm
just,
pretty sure.
and then, so we have 20 classroom teachers, so that leaves 15, 16, 17 other certified teachers. Could we get a list of who those people are for all
All
the
the
three,
schools? We can break it
three,
down.
for these three?
Do you want like groupings, like how many of those are guidance counselors?
Yeah.
How many are
Yes.
reading teachers?
Yep.
Yeah, we can do that.
But that's actually,
It's in the appendix.
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yep,
the appendix C,
understaffing, yeah. We used to do that.
so that is the full breakout.
Fine.
So look at appendix C,
Did not see that.
third page into the appendices tab. And then when you see that in each location, it is rolled off, certified teacher for here is broken out.
Okay, got it.
Oh, last year we had that
Yep.
in so in order to minimize the right, we had that kind of,
Okay, thank you, that's perfect.
right, we had that by school.
Okay, can I ask one other?
Absolutely.
So I see the guidance counselor in here, but where's the social worker? Okay. Okay, so there's really more than, so that's in addition to the 35, 36, 37 people. Okay, thank you.
Page 3?
So my question on page 3 is the ELA. It's up 106%. Is that teacher college? You purchasing library books?
Let's see, the 106. That line includes, yes, it includes classroom libraries and teacher classroom, TC classroom libraries, and
Teacher college.
TC intervention as well. So that's
So
what.
is that recurring every year, or are we
No.
purchasing a program and then we'll have it on
Right now,
site?
we've budgeted so that every grade level has 3 TC libraries, so that, like, there's one between 2 or 3 teachers to share. So that's where we are going to be at if we keep this up.
Budget. Okay.
Okay, page 4?
I have a question. I've noticed in all the schools that we're increasing our books in our library. What's the cause of this? 'Cause- and the reason I ask is because I do know that some of the schools, their PTOs add books to the library with each book fair that they have. So I'm kind of wondering where these percentages are coming from, because they're high at all the schools.
So I can't speak for the other schools, but I could answer for here. A library collection is a little bit like a garden. So a good, healthy library, you're constantly weeding, you're removing books that are no longer relevant. Many of our books, I'm looking right behind your shoulder actually, are paperback that are, like have that laminate type cover. They break down over time. So it's not keeping all the books that we have and just adding on to it. It's kind of more of a refresher.
Replacing them, okay. Is that pretty much the same with the other schools as well? It's just that
Yeah,
it's just a
and
constant
there are
replacement?
subscriptions that our librarians have to do Junior Library Guild. That would be Caldecott Award winners, Newbery Award winners, so you keep current with what is in children's literature, and the hardbacks, so that there's more life to them. And the nonfiction, there's the amount of nonfiction, the interest in nonfiction of the little guys is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Okay, and the special ed supplies, it's not much, but you're taking out 100% of the supplies, non-special ed, non-CAT.
That's actually on another page.
Okay, so let's move to another page.
What page is the special ed?
What page is that, Eileen?
Page 4,
Okay, we're on.
4th one down.
We are bored.
It's object 56.
It's down
You're looking under
further.
sped?
Yeah.
Page
just
6.
They removed
Yeah,
everything.
page 6.
Page 6, so it's moved to moved to
Yeah.
another category.
Angie?
Okay,
Can I
yeah.
go back?
Yeah, it's on page 6, yeah.
Am I getting confused if I go back to page 3?
No, not me.
Okay, I want to go back to page 1.
Oh,
Sorry. Oh, you guys.
There's
It's just
three,
a
there's
quick
3 lines on
question.
page 1.
I want to go home.
Nothing like honesty, Bill.
That's it.
The Teachers College book truck, what makes that different than just a standard rolling book cart?
Well, that's what it is. I mean, it's for Northville, we have color-coded rolling book carts. And so we know that it's a second grade cart because it's yellow. So all the books on that cart are second grade level. So it's just a convenient way to house the books so they're accessible to all the teachers.
Okay, so it's nothing special, I mean, it's no additional
No.
cost just because it's teachers' college?
Well, we use them for the teacher college books, but they're just generic book trucks.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
This one's for Anthony. So if we look on page 2, this is just so I can get it going throughout the book. When we look at the operating expenses at this building on page 2, when we get to the bottom under major object code, I can understand why capital and other isn't there when you compare it to the superintendent's overview. But the benefits is also missing, right? That piece is missing?
Right, none of those benefits are nestled within any of the buildings.
That's
They're
it.
all in the DOCA section.
Right. So if you were looking at, because I'd asked this question in another venue, if you wanted to get an idea for what one school were per se to the district, you have to go back and add in that cost.
You would have to go back and add the DOCA section for benefits
Exactly.
broken out by schools, and you would have to go to facilities and grab the by school cost there. I would
Correct.
say within facilities, it's already broken out by school location, what is left within the facilities tab. To do the benefits pieces, you can't just go within DOCA
Of
and
course.
find the HPS piece for benefits. That would have to be done separate.
The challenge with benefits is.
I do,
family
I
plan,
understand.
single,
I just
yeah.
wanted, that was just for me,
Yes.
so, sorry, go ahead.
Anything more for page 1?
That was page 2.
She hasn't got back yet.
I'll do page 3.
JT?
Maybe Josh can answer. Well, this is just overall, we talked about this a little bit last year, the per student allotment that each school is given. And again, I think I've mentioned this before, but, I think having 2 elementaries, we want to try to get parity as best we can. It looks like enrollment, there will be parity. And as far as the student allocation goes, I see some lines, let's say like the 611 account for general instructional supplies might be a little bit different in both buildings. But what are the student allotments? What is that number? Because then the principals, you have some discretion on how you allocate your student allotment, right?
So we break down kind of a controlled number with probably like 14 different factors.
Right.
The high school gets a slightly larger per student allotment because they have athletics, they have music programs, and then that number, and I can see Anthony moving, he's going to pull up the formula, but then that number is multiplied by the projected number of students.
Right.
And it backs out things like telephone, security, benefits, salaries. It really gives them kind of those supply lines. And then the building principals can prioritize, as Ms. Bilko said, what's the age of my library? Maybe this year I need to put more money there. Maybe my art room needs a little more. So like they kind of migrate based on the needs of their building. That's where you'll see some of the lines move not in parity. And then at the same time, they all need the same number, relatively speaking, of math consumables. So those lines tend to have more parity. When you have things like the TC units, depending on what they have, that may shift slightly, or maybe like nonfiction is something that right now we have over the last couple of years, that's more of a shift to put more nonfiction earlier on. Some schools might have been better equipped for that shift just based on the organics of their building. Some schools may need to bolster that, so that's where that kind of principal and teacher conversation happen in the buildings. Do you want to pull up and talk to that per student?
So this year, the per pupil, last year, they weren't similar amongst all 3 locations, and this year they are the same in HPS and in NES. They're the same, so I will go slightly different. The 2 K through 5s are the same, K through 2s are the same. Yeah,
Wait.
per pupil cost.
Yeah, you can-
Yeah, so the amount that's at HPS and NES is $315.19.
Can you give an example of like the lines that those are controlled in when, or tell them what we back out? I know it's security, telephone, salaries. But in there, like math, language arts, spelling.
Right, so if you take the total budget, things that are backed out are the salaries and security monitors. We have transportation costs that are pulled out, special education, some pupil services also within special education. It doesn't take into account any offsets in revenues.
Is that sufficient,
Oh,
or?
yeah, this is-
Yeah,
this is
that's
great.
fine, okay. We know, we
That's a
don't,
great setup. And then for Sarah Noble, Anthony, what is that number there? Is the-
number's fine.
Yeah, number's totally fine.
The total that was given to Sarah Noble is $234.20.
Okay. All right. No, and I think that's fair. I mean, to say, the school gets this much per student, that's what you have to work with. And, right, and I know, like, maybe the way you make it work is great, you know.
So there's
but-
some discrepancies last year, so we worked over the summer to correct for that, so
Yep.
that it's equitable now, and they all kind of get the same per student.
Right. Because this is really the only, these two buildings, in my thought, that are the only two we really want to focus on, just being have that parity between both sides of town. You know, that's, so that.
The other
that's where
three
I'm-
buildings, total parity.
It's really easy, right? Very easy.
That's right.
Okay, page 5. And page 6. Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to Northville. The infamous page 1.
My question was answered.
It's March 7 in the book anyway, so you're off,
So
okay. Page 7, any questions? And moving on to 8.
I'm just gonna ask a question, I probably understand. I've always wondered why we haven't tried to go to a full-time assistant principal in the elementary schools, the way things are changing. I mean, we talked about the social worker, but I just think it's almost an impossible task for a principal on maybe 2 days to be by themselves. So is there a reason why you took it out, or it's just budgetary, or?
Well, I'm going to field this one. I totally concur. There are a number of things that an assistant principal to work between multiple buildings, the continuity thing. We just heard earlier about the guidance counselor, that, you know, he does give you continuity and better able. To answer your question, budget.
Okay, so if we're at 2.59 and surrounding districts are going much higher than that.
Yes.
And last year, we kind of put 2 kindergarten teachers in.
Yes, we did.
My question is, what would it cost to put a full-time assistant principal in each of those schools?
Well, we'll find out.
Thank you.
0.8, I mean, so each one is a 0.6 right now, so to make each of those
It's a
whole.
0.8, it's a 0.4,
would be a
0.4.
0.8
Right.
administrator, if you look at step 1,
Yeah.
110,000.
110, okay, thank you.
Question answered.
Yeah, easy,
Ballpark,
ballpark, as long as it's not the Yankees.
yeah.
Okay.
I have a
Brian?
question. I just highlighted, I see there's a drop in 2 certified teachers. Where's that drop?
That was in, it's grade 1, 2, grade 2.
What
I should say this off the top of my head. At Northville, it's grade 2 and kindergarten.
It's on page 7, right?
Oh.
Yes,
Oh, there
slide
you go.
24, page 7, page 11 and 9.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So if you're dropping 2 teachers, why is the budget only down 100,000?
Sure, so in the budget-to-budget change column on page 8, you'll see the reduction of 69,000 in certified salaries. That
Okay, yeah.
is less than the salary of 2 teachers. That's offset by increases in the teachers that are
benefits.
there, and their salary increases, step moves. And then one of the challenging things when you look at that line that is 100% specific to the staff in this building. I can, Ms. Baldelli and Mr. Giovanone worked super hard so that that number is real. So we know every teacher in that line, what step they're on, what their current salary is, what their expected salary increase is. And so if you have a building of teachers that are younger, that are moving up or being frozen in next year's contract because their step freezes versus, more experienced teachers, that is all captured in there, and so that gets washed against the two reductions of positions.
Got it, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and page 9. And page 10. Moving on to page 11. JT?
Good question there on the security. Is that purchase services security right in the middle there? Is that kind of spread out amongst all the buildings then? Or is that specific security to building by building?
That is a little bit of both.
Okay.
So it's specific in that that is the safety monitor in the building. When you go to the high school, it would be more because they have more.
It's different.
But it's actuals based on the staff in that
Staff in
building.
there, okay.
Yep.
Can we jump back to 10 for a minute? Could you explain the science? It's down 88.98%, overall.
That is,
Page 10, top one.
percent down,
Yeah, percentage down.
which is a reduction of $500.
Right, it's based on the smaller number.
So if you look at the 17-18 budget was 4,539.
Right,
There's a reduction of $500. And so the budget for next year,
okay, so but you're taking out supplies and
I'm sorry,
instructions?
the budget is down 5,000, so
Yeah.
I'll ask Ms. Murray to speak to
You're taking out library books and science.
Right, with the
Supplies.
library books, are in the TC libraries,
Okay.
yeah, so they're
Replacing
absorbed
them
there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and moving on to 12. Which brings us to Sarah Noble. Okay, on page 13.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Can't get past that one, can I?
I know, I can't pass this page. This is just a strange question, but why, is there a difference between the different line items for the one full-time teachers in grade 4 and grade 5? Why are they why do we have two there? Why is it 1 and 1? Do they come out of different budgets or something?
No, we just listed them individually,
Oh, okay.
just so you can see kind of granular.
So there's no, okay.
You mean in the overview page?
Yep,
the
this
top.
is an overview, the very, very
It says
top.
grade
Yep.
4-1, grade 4-1.
Yeah, just so you could
two
see each
grades.
section, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, and 14. And 15.
Give me just a second.
Yep.
I had a-
We can go back.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
And page 6.
Wait, no, I'm going right back to the very, very bottom of that page, a negative.
What page are we on?
14 or 15?
We're 15?
Yep.
15.
Negative 36.13 in math. Percentage.
Well, we spoke a little bit about that in the overview. The math lines are from that 3-year contract, so last year was
But
a
we're
little
down.
heavier, but this year it's a little bit less there.
Okay, so this
Okay.
is just based on that 3-year, we're just falling
Right,
short
right.
towards
We're
the
still,
end of
we're
our-
still ensuring that all kids get the same thing in all 3 years, just looks a little different on paper.
Okay, very good.
And 16.
I have the same question for science.
Shift.
For science,
Yep, there's a negative 26.47, making that line negative 16.51 in science. for,
Okay, for the instructional supplies and signs. So two things happened there. Number one is last year we invested heavily in some mystery science supplies there that were necessary. This year we didn't need as many, and then add to that, we're getting smaller. So just sliding down a
so
little
we're
bit.
not decreasing our science
We are not.
curriculum?
There's a lot of great science
utilizing
instruction that's happening here every day.
Excellent.
Wendy?
Page 17, the,
Hang on there, you're ahead of me.
Moving along.
I apologize, are we still on 16?
We are,
Go ahead, go
but
ahead,
we'll go to
sorry.
17.
No,
Page 17.
the
Wendy.
57,500 line for furniture and fixtures, we separated it, we had 2,500 last year and 2,500 this year, what?
And so, last year, what I explained is, this building, this library, the furniture wasn't as appropriate for 8-year-olds as it should be.
Correct.
But, we said, had we just redone all the furniture, it would be a huge amount. So what I asked last year, and that I'm asking this year, is that we have a small amount of money as like a refresh line. So we are slowly migrating our furniture away from like those chairs behind me that are more high school size, down to smaller furniture for smaller children.
Okay, with that in mind, are you anticipating that line item being there to keep going in that same?
Well,
Or will
I
this
think-
2,500 keep it, or would it, is this the type of project that we should have possibly looked at to do it all at once and maybe look at taking it in
Well, I
the
think
capital?
that's getting back to the
Well,
superintendent.
I think this,
Yeah.
along with furniture, you also have the same thing is gonna happen. From time
It's
to
wear
time,
and
you're gonna
tear.
need new things. Things are gonna
Course.
break, they're gonna have a table with 3 legs.
Right.
So this gives us an opportunity to kind of assess every year, how are we doing, do we need something, and be current with what we're thinking. If you do it all in one big shot, if we would have last year, then you're looking at one big purchase again. So the refresh line seemed a healthier, more fiscally responsible way to get at that. And to do it, just with a little bit of watching the kids how what's working best.
Sure.
If I could just add, I think that's the thing we need to consider as a board, operating budget versus capital budget and defining, capital reserve
Well,
budget.
years ago, we did that.
Right.
And we would often go from take the
Yes.
entire operational budget,
That's-
piece out what was capital, push it over to capital reserve, request a capital reserve
Right.
expense, and then do it this way. This is,
Yeah,
we have been doing it, but now we're doing it, I would say, we're using the capital the way, in a more transparent
absolutely.
manner. However, in light of all the challenges and decisions that we have to make, it's,
Gotcha.
for me personally, I'd
Gotcha.
rather cut chairs and go after it in a different venue than in other areas. That's all I'm
Absolutely.
asking.
And one of the things, just to keep kind of connecting it to, I think it was JT's question before, is that the other piece of this is for building principals
Yes.
to get in a cycle where that's part of their per pupil allotment.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we struggle with, when we try to create parity between schools, is we'll create a per student allotment multiplied out, and this happened last year with those cuts, the 750,000. When we took them out of supplies, you are basically reducing, depending on the line you take it out of, kind of the per student allotment. And so depending on where a principal chooses to put it. So for example, and I'm not saying that we don't do this, it's just something that I want to be transparent and have a conversation about. If principals put it in a furniture line and then we pull that line and move it out, then the next year, do we build that back into their per student line? And does that artificially kind of inflate or deflate? And that was one of the things when we looked at the high school line, for example, we took a lot of money out of those 750 in cuts from the high school's basically discretionary funds. And so when we build it back this year, they saw, and you'll see this a little bit on the
That's why I'm
foreshadow,
asking.
kind of an artificial increase in some of those lines because we basically diminished their per student allotment last year.
Didn't we also take an adjustment when the board did its board adoption? We hit the supply line, and then we received an initial 250 cut from the town council, then the 750,
Correct.
correct?
That was 250 and then 5.
250 and 5.
50 total.
750 total,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But I could see how that would manifest, like, I think, as a board, we agreed to go to 611, but as a principal decided how they wanted to work their own allotment, that might have disproportionately affected their 611, let's say, consumable or supplies account, and not, let's say, a
That's-
furniture. So I think it's upon us to have some discretion for principals to make that, because I think that highlights exactly what Josh is saying. That 611 got hit across the board, but it might have been disproportionate based on what building principals had in
Kind of the trust we hope to build is that what I don't want to do is create a scenario where principals don't put what they need in lines that they think the board's going to cut, because they don't want to do that. What we want to do is say, put it where you and your staff need it, and then if the board feels that we have, if you say we need to carve out 100,000 of this budget, then help us have conversations of the kinds of things that you want us to focus on, and include the schools and where those cuts come from, so that we don't create kind of an unintended consequence, especially the year after. And that's one of the challenges, like when Anthony and I talk about per-student expenditures, do we say, don't put it in furniture lines because that's something that people are gonna cut, or do we say, here's where we're going, and let's all be transparent, so that next year when we build the budget and that increase is 200%, people understand why that manifests there. So that's kind of the dialogue we wanna encourage.
Page 17, the ELL, it's up 104.67%.
So that's a new position this year.
Full-time position?
Excuse me?
Full-time?
We have a bilingual teacher that is with us for 5 of 6 days a cycle. So we're on a 6-day cycle, and one day of the cycle, they go up to Schaghticoke to support some students up there.
Okay, good. So if you have 100.4.67, and you take nothing away from it, you come up to 102.13. Just math is interesting. Okay.
A little bit of a mind bender.
Yeah. That doesn't
And
add up.
page 18?
The administration,
Just a minute.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
Page 18? Eileen?
the telephone, school administrator, 102% increase.
So there's two pieces to that. I'll look to Anthony just to check my explanation, but two pieces of that. One is distributing actual phone costs to each of the schools, and the other piece is we currently don't have a maintenance contract for our phones. If a phone breaks, we go to the facilities budget or the technology budget and repair it out of there. What we're finding is that that is not an efficient way to budget, that it'd be much more cost efficient for us to have a service contract. And so the cost of the kind of annual service contract is now being built into each of the phone cost lines. And then you'll see, I think it was, maybe Ms. Fallenbach was asking about kind of what does it cost to operate a school? And so right now, kind of the repair for telephones is buried in other maintenance repair accounts. This way we'll have a service contract and it'll be built into the per-school phone account.
So just for the school, the contract is $4,896?
The combination of shifting the actual cost per building and the service track. And I'm just looking at Anthony to make sure that I'm explaining it correctly. Yes,
So it should show up in the other,
yes. If you look
Other-
at the phone lines in the other schools, it'll be less of an impact because their schools are smaller and they have fewer staff and they have fewer phones. This school has a lot of phones.
A lot of phones. It's a big
So
place.
the impact is more extreme.
okay, thank you.
And page 9, oh, Tammy.
It's okay, the 56110 under the student activities, that's your club supplies?
Bless you.
Instructional supplies for student activities?
Is that just supplies for the
Those
clubs?
are for clubs, yeah.
And that includes the
Supplies.
intramurals?
Intramurals, for the most part, we don't need a lot of supplies necessarily for intramurals, but chess club, computer science club, those types of, we bought some yoga mats for our yoga club. So refreshing items that those teachers need.
I think
Glad to see.
$500 is actually low.
Yeah.
Yoga mats? My daughter bought one, believe me, I know.
When I, the yoga
Not
mats
those
was, yoga mats are not cheap, but,
Yeah, I was
everybody
gonna
needs
say,
a
you
little.
got yoga mats.
OCC.
And page 19. And, oh, thank you. Well, not quite. Again, I'd like to remind everybody, should questions pop up, please alert myself or Mr. Smith. You can always ask them on other nights, even though they're under different topics. Keep that in mind. With that being said, opportunity for the public to be heard. Anyone wishing to make a comment this evening? Once, twice, okay. In that case, we'll recess to tomorrow night,
Weather permitting?
weather permitting, January 17th, 2018. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.